would you say if I told you that nonprofits should be abolished? Welcome back to the Idea Supply Chain, where we take a look at where ideas come from and what makes those ideas valuable. Today, I wanted to talk about the concept of nonprofits. And I want to start out by saying I think a lot of nonprofits exist for very noble reasons, but I think the structure of them should be abolished. And this idea is something that I've tossed around in my head quite a bit, but I really came to a much clearer conclusion as to why when I was reading this new book I got from Barista to Billionaire by Andrew Wilkinson. So, Andrew is somebody that I really admire his story. I think he has done some really cool things, and I picked up his book because I was, a fan. I enjoyed seeing kind of what he's done, and um, I was excited to learn more about his journey. But there were a couple of scenes specifically that really clarified a couple things for me. Um, the first was with a former employee after he became wealthy. Um, this former employee reaches out to him, asks him to dinner, whatever. And basically, the guy gets really upset with Andrew because he feels that Andrew cheated him because when the company was really young, you know, Andrew gave him the choice of like, hey, we can pay you less and give you stock, or we can pay you more money. And the guy chose more money instead of stock. And therefore, like, he didn't have that ownership stake in the company when the company sold. And it's one of those things that as time goes on, people end up with very different trajectories. And this is one of those stories that could very much go the other way if, he had taken stock and then the company went out of business instead of sold, right? Suddenly there are these much different outcomes. And so this is nothing related to nonprofits directly, but it's this idea that people don't actually understand how like the financial system is set up and how to really evaluate risk versus reward because it's very, very complex. We've done a lot to complicate this entire structure. And so depending on what you feel your needs are in the short term, makes your decisions based on the short term versus the long term. And a lot of us have a very hard time looking to a long-term future because we're not sure if that future will ever actually happen. The second scene in the book that really stood out to me was one where Andrew went out on a date with a waitress. And basically it kind of, conversation came around to like billionaires. And she basically said that she thought billionaires should be abolished. Was talking about working at a nonprofit, but like waitressing on the side to kind of help pay the bills. Because there's this idea with nonprofits, right? Like people want to donate to nonprofits, but they want the money to solely go to like support whatever the cause is. They don't want to pay things like overhead, which means they don't want to pay people's salaries. But people are doing actual work there. And so the whole structure of a nonprofit creates this really bizarre incentive mechanism where it's like, we want all the money to go to, helping the people who need help, but we don't want any of the money to go to infrastructure that actually makes it more efficient and easier to help the people who need it. See how dumb that is? And so I know people who work for nonprofits, and some of them like run nonprofits for free just because they think it's something that should be done. And that's something that I believe we need to get rid of because we need to reward people doing the work that matters, regardless of who is the recipient of the work. And what we need to do is we need to really think about the way we reward, we set up our incentive structures because right now we are doing an excessive amount of rewarding the people who already have been rewarded. Say it again. Like the people who already have a ton of money get a lot more of the rewards because they typically have either the knowledge of how the entire structure works, which is why they set it up the way they did and they became the winners, or they have the money to pay the people who understand how the system works to kind of make sure that they're doing everything in their power to come out ahead. versus the people who are doing the work for nonprofits because they truly believe that it's something that matters and it's a cause that is important to them. And that should be paid just as much, if not more, than people who have simply figured out the way the system works and arranged it to work better for them. And so when I say that the nonprofit structure needs to be abolished, that's exactly what I mean. I think we really, as a society, need to create ways to just reward people for doing the shit that matters. And sometimes that takes organization. It takes the same skills to build a nonprofit as it does a business, because in the end, it's coordinating people to solve problems more efficiently over time. But because we call it a nonprofit, it's, an act of charity. We just give our money away, and that's not valuable. But it is. And it's long-term value created for the economy because it helps people in situations now who don't have the ability to pay for it, which then puts them in a better position in the future to be able to pay for it. And, whether, it comes to things like social programs in the US or anything like that, there's all of this focus on making sure that, somebody non-deserving doesn't get help. Fuck, if they're going through these programs, give them what they need. The cost of enforcing all of these giant list of rules to determine who is deserving of the help is such a goddamn waste of money. And I'm tired of seeing shit like that. We could be so much better if we were just more generous with everything we paid out. We live in a very abundant world right now. And so when I talk about, writing a book called Engineering Generosity, this is kind of the thing that I'm talking about, because there are ways to embed abundance in the structures we create. And one of the key components there is not being stingy because somebody may or may not get help that, they don't deserve help. Who are you to say whether or not they deserve it? That is such a judgmental thing, but it is based into our legal structures and everything. People are so like focused on who might get this help. And in the end, by doing that, they end up accidentally filtering out people who do need the help because of situations that you can't identify on paper. And, okay, maybe you filter out one person who, oh, well, they could have found a job or whatever and, gotten food that way and all of this. But is that worth the economic cost of, accidentally withholding food from 5 people who needed it? And, you filtered out the one, but you brought 5 other people along with them? Like, no, that doesn't actually make economic sense. And so when you're really looking at the overall system, it's easy to see how generosity is actually a valuable thing economically, because what you're doing is you're creating extra value for the 5 people, even though you've got one person who maybe isn't carrying their weight or whatever, which I think is kind of a dumb concept anyway, but that's for a different video. But you make sure that everybody who could possibly need the help gets the help, because then they're going to be able to go on and actually do bigger and better things in the economy instead of figuring out how the fuck they're supposed to try to eat. And so that's why I think the concept of the nonprofits should be abolished, because it is valuable work that is being done, but we don't have a good way to track the value created. And so we, kind of laugh at people who are, doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, but really it's just valuable work in the economy that hasn't been captured and tracked and rewarded properly. And that's the biggest problem with it. the nonprofit designation is causing like really fucked up accounting. And that means that the economy can't like actually price it in correctly. And so the people doing the work that matters, and trying to build out systems of making things better for the world don't actually have the resources they need. They're resource constrained. They can't bring in, highly skilled experts to do what they want because they just are so resource constrained because nobody wants to fucking pay for overhead. Like they want to contribute to like supporting the cause. What supports the cause? More efficient systems that make sure that every dollar put in goes further. It's not about the number of dollars. It's about how efficiently that money is spent. And when you talk to people in a business context, they'll tell you that same thing. That's how they think about it. But when they're donating to charity, they view it in a completely different fucking situation. It's like, well, I want the money to go to support the cause. How does this cause actually get fixed? Like, how do the problems actually get fixed in the world? You build systems around it. You bring in people who know what they're doing to help make sure every single dollar that comes in goes out with bigger and bigger impact. And that's the type of work that we need to start rewarding, regardless of how it's accounted for in the economy. No more of this like for-profit, non-profit shit. It's inefficient, it's outdated, and it needs to be abolished. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.